Hello everybody, and welcome back to Flow and the Art of Miata Maintenance. My name is Joe Carey, and I'm so glad you are here with me. I'm here at a small nature reserve near my shop in southwestern Massachusetts. It's named the Housatonic Flats because it runs along the river of that name, and it's floodplain flat. I call this place Philosophy Flats because I often come here to walk or run when I want to think things through a bit. I'm here today because before diving into the content of the show, I want to begin to explain in a philosophical way the pictogram from last episode. I wish I could explain it all, the whole and the parts, all at once, but I can't. It took Pirsig over 400 pages to explain all he had to explain. It's going to take me at least a few episodes. I'm choosing a philosophical way of explaining things, in part because that is how my mind was formed, how I was taught to explain things. You see, I share with Pirsig's protagonist not only an interest in machine maintenance and repair, and not only that desire to inflict a chautauqua on others, I also share with him an academic background in philosophy. 20 years ago, I completed a PhD in political hermeneutics, a program of study quite similar to the analysis of ideas and study of methods program of Pirsig's protagonist. Like him, I fell out or got pushed out of academia, but the questions that drove me there have never left me entirely. So let's get started on some of those questions. In the last episode, we were asking about life, about living things, about what life is. It feels only natural to start with what science says about life. But already there is a problem here. That's because the science that concerns itself with life, biology, is like the moody adolescent of the natural sciences. What I mean by that is that physicists and chemists, they know who they are and what they are doing. They know their basic terms and have command of the fundamental relationships between them. But biology, it's still trying to figure itself out. Oh, sure, physics has to grapple with the fact that its base categories of space and time are merely relative. And chemistry at the margins keeps bumping into the uncertainty principle at its core. But biology has an even bigger problem. It can't even settle on a reliable definition of what it is trying to understand: life. It can say a fair amount about what life does and why it does it, but it stumbles when trying to determine what exactly life is. But it's making progress, and much of that progress points in the direction of our pictogram, which shows life to be this particular kind of instance, this quasi-enclosed and balanced interaction between precariousness, preciousness, and promiscuity. What does this view of life, let's call it the PPP view, have over other efforts to define life? One key thing. Briefly stated, it is a maximalist view of life. That means it allows for life to be as big as life really is. It presents living things not simply as slightly more complicated versions of non-living things, essentially governed by the same set of laws as these non-living things. It presents life as something categorically different. It insists that the metabolic processes and behavioral activities of beluga whales at sea can never be understood in the same way as the movement of billiard balls on a billiard table. The PPP way of thinking about life holds life to be a very distinct kind of thing that must be understood on its own terms and in accordance with its own manner of methodology. It is an emergent view of things as opposed to the reductive view of things that so dominated early scientific thought and still haunts and plays havoc with our imaginations and thinking today. Let's consider this emergent view for a second. An emergent view, whether of life or all of reality, accepts, it anticipates new things and novel means of understanding those new things. And what that means and this is the key thing, is that the emergent view can work with freedom. It gets freedom, makes room for freedom. It tolerates the random that purely happens to be so contingent random, and isn't always trying to rationalize the freedom of the random away by fitting everything, and I mean everything, into a box set of overdetermined and linearly lined up causalities. An emergent view of reality, for example, has no trouble thinking about the pure joy of driving a Miata, while the reductive view wants to, reduce that ecstatic feeling experience to a set of neat but flat biochemical causes and imperatives. Now, there's nothing wrong with trying to understand the causes of things. We experience curiosity as a stubborn fact of our existence that begins with the persistent "but why, mommy" of kids and never truly leaves those we consider to be flourishing and truly alive. But as much as we want to understand our world, to observe its regularities, learn its laws, and benefit from the knowledge of those laws, at the same time, don't we also bristle at the idea of being entirely subject to those laws? And if you look around, isn't it easy to see how much life joins us in that protest? While the babbling brook does not curse the course forced upon it by the stream bed's form and the laws of Newton, the sheep and goat regularly kick against the goad, and ruminating cows risk the occasional electric shock for the freedom to taste the greener grass beyond the fence. Don't these inevitable but inexplicable acts of defiance by our animal kin make a compelling argument for an intrinsic link between freedom and life? The German philosopher Hans Jonas thinks they do, and from there argues for the inseparability between the PPP view of life, as represented by our pictogram, and a truly coherent understanding of freedom. That was a mouthful. Thankfully, it is a theme that I'll be returning to now and again. It's time to move on, but before I leave Philosophy Flats, allow me just 2 points of clarification before we get back to cars and our story. First point to clarify has to do with the word promiscuity. What in the world do I mean when I speak of life as promiscuous? The meaning of precariousness and preciousness, I think, is clear and uncontroversial, at least at first glance. Promiscuity, on the other hand, has some baggage, and I want to dig through that a bit to open up on some clarity. The word has its roots in the Latin pro miscere. That's pro meaning for or in favor of, miscere meaning to mix. To be promiscuous, as I intend here, is to be in favor of mixing or blending with things. Now, I understand that the word has a somewhat different meaning today, but it was the uptight Victorians who reduced the word's meaning to a matter of sexual transience and excess. And who wants to throw in their lot with reductive, uptight Victorians? Again, what I mean by life is promiscuous is that repeatedly and with unwavering regularity, life finds a way, to quote Dr. Malcolm from Jurassic Park. And it does so by trying new things, often and eagerly, and by easily mixing with other living things and non-living things. Life is eager to mingle, and this is so at its very foundational or elemental level. Consider carbon, life's elemental precursor. Carbon is famous for its promiscuity. Once it appeared on the scene as the sixth participant in creation, things really started to complexify and get interesting. So interesting, in fact, that the environmentalist Paul Hawken has recently published an entire book on the heroic history of humble carbon. Life is promiscuous in our sense, in part because carbon is so promiscuous. Secondly, I want to say something about the arrows of the pictogram. The arrows are there to express movement. Life manifests movement. Life is always moving. And what is that movement all about? What is it like? How does it feel? And feel at its most basic and essential level? Well, it's there in the title of this video essay. Flow. Life is all about a sense of flow. the rhythms and rhymes of flow. Pirsig calls that sense of flow gumption. Others refer to it as energy, as in, I'm energized by such and such an activity, like driving or working on a Miata. How can I sum up these reflections from our walk around Philosophy Flats? It's actually quite simple. I am here in large part to propose and champion a particular definition of life, one that is compelling, rigorous, and deeply engaged with current conversations among biologists and philosophers, but without being reductive and dismissive of life's essential freedom. In other words, a definition of life that emphasizes life's willingness, eagerness even, to enter the fray and mix things up. One that places the movement of life, the flow of life, at times erratic and edgy, front and center. Now back to our story.